Welcome back to another episode of the Ironsides podcast. I've got a gentleman by the name of Rick Jacobs here. Rick, how are you today, man? Welcome to the show.
Doing well. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you. We've been back and forth for maybe a little over a month now, just on getting this thing together. This is a little bit of a different episode in terms of talking about training, the roots of training as it comes from or as we kind of talk about the educational process, the foundational and fundamental components of making a training program work, the delivery of that, the accountability to it. There are so many things that are going to come up in this episode. And for some people, it may be, I'm just going to say it could be mind-blowing. And there's a huge, obviously, I think the main thing getting into is law enforcement and how they're brought up in their training process and just kind of the institution of that process, but then how it trickles over into like third party stuff when we look at like firearms instruction and all the things that come along in the industry. Let's just put it that way. This is broad and it can go very deep. So we're going to kind of start high level today and just kind of give people an idea who you are, where you're coming from, bit of your history, and what you're doing now. We'll talk about the company. We'll talk about the efforts you're making, the new things that you're doing, and dig down into some stuff here and hopefully give people some insights that can help them. So. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's just start with a little bit about Rick, kind of your who you are, your history, where you're coming from, and then we'll take it from there, man.
Well, it's always a difficult tale to start because there's the long story and there's a short story. Typically, when people ask me how I'm doing, I'll say, "Do you want the truth, or do you want a short story?" So to just narrow it down to my life in training and instruction, I started as a graphic artist and working part-time at a law enforcement supply store. And I was hired as a gun salesman for this law enforcement supply store in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I always like to have two jobs when I'm self-employed. One, to get me out of the basement so I don't turn into one of those weird cat collecting people that, people are like, oh, he always seemed like a nice guy and ends up on the news. But I never really saw myself going into law enforcement until I started working for a law enforcement supply store. And I had a couple minutes in the military. It's nothing worth talking about. Ultimately, I joined the Army and the Marine Corps. God didn't want me in either. So for reasons beyond my control, I wasn't able to have a storied career in the military. So I'm not super cool. I'm more medium drag, low speed. But
that makes two of us.
Yeah. But I from age 11, I always wanted to be in the military. I planned on being in the military. I joined when I was in 85, when I was a junior in high school, did split option training, stuff like that. But that's what gave me a lot of my taste for firearms, especially for training. I learned that I really loved training. I really enjoyed the firearms aspect of it. And I was pretty good. Shot pretty well with the M16 in both basic trainings. But like I said, God didn't want me in the military, so I wasn't able to finish my contracts. But years later, I'm working for myself as a graphic artist, and my part-time job in law enforcement. I was hired because of my experience with military and law enforcement related weapons. And after a little while, they asked me to work the firing range, which was inside the store. And so I went to NRA law enforcement instructor course, firearms instructor course, CCW, range master, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And that was my first taste of an instructor course. And I did not enjoy it. I just felt like there had to be more. There had to be more. But Utah had just started the shall issue CCW process. And I started developing my own training for concealed weapons, concealed carry, firearm safety, stuff like that. Didn't really like the NRA products or methodology at the time. Through my graphic design, I was self-taught. I was working for international advertising agencies and national publishing companies. And I had a reputation of teaching people how to use Photoshop, Illustrator, Quark Express, all those things. And eventually I was hired by a trade school to teach on those softwares. And that was a lot of fun, but I created my own curriculum. I'd already started doing firearms instruction. And so I applied the things I did in firearms instruction to the classroom, where I was believed you learn best by doing it. So for years, I worked in training graphic design, training civilians in use of firearms, working with law enforcement, mainly SWAT teams, where I was a role player and I got to observe how they conducted training. Okay. And I saw a lot of gaps, and I was really confused by a lot of what they were doing. Years later, about 1998, I moved to Virginia, just outside Fredericksburg, Virginia. And they had no law enforcement supply store. I didn't know if I was going to work in D.C. or Richmond. And my county, Spotsylvania County Sheriff's Office, has a part-time law enforcement program. I was like, well, the graphic design industry is tanking because everyone's buying a PC. And anyone with a painter program is now a graphic artist doing logos for $50. I'm charging $1,500 for logos. So I was like, I'm going to give law enforcement a shot. And I joined Spotsylvania County Sheriff's Office. At the time, I didn't get paid to go through full-time basic. I didn't get paid for my field training. But man, I fell in love with it. And even though I was part-time, I worked full-time hours. The only difference between me and a part-timer, based on our Sheriff's Office perspective, was that as a part-timer, I could work whatever shifts I wanted, but I got no benefits. I got the same pay. I got overtime. I had training available, all that stuff. I had a take-home car, and I did it. I was working every week. I had overtime. I very quickly learned I liked evenings and midnights. I hated day shift primarily because there's too many people who are like, can you come tell my kid to go to school? I was not the guy to answer that call. So I was on the road for a year, went to New York City for 9/11 to do recovery efforts. I was there for 11 days. But my county has a nuclear power plant on the lake that is one of our borders. And we had people working in the military who were also part-time deputies. And they told me while I was in New York City, you need to come home. And when I got home, they said there was a credible threat, and they did not want to have to explain why they had a dead deputy in New York City. And plus, 2 days before 9/11, I found out that my wife was pregnant with our first child. So sheriff did not want to have to make that notification. Plus, I'm now the guy in the sheriff's office with mass casualty experience. So they wanted me there to help out. When I came back, I worked road full-time for a year, came back, and our patrol captain said, Rick, we're grateful for all you've done. We're going to send you to 2 schools, and you can choose one for yourself. So they sent me to general instructor. They sent me to FTO, and then I got to choose to go to SWAT basic. So that really reinforced my love for training. It was really surprising to be asked to do that. When I came back, I worked full-time and was working full-time graphic design work for federal government, but I was also doing full-time work at the sheriff's office and absolutely loving it. So I started out in instruction and training in 1994. In 2000, I went through my first law enforcement instructor certification course. And it was mostly about presentation. I had a lot of fun. It was a third-party vendor that delivered the training. Same with my field training class. And I just felt like there was a lot missing in creating training materials. And there was a lot more that they could do. My basic training was in law enforcement. It was one of my worst experiences in any kind of training or education. And it was frustrating. So I endeavored to try to improve the instructor's materials. And I tried to bring my experience in training law enforcement and training software and stuff to Basic Academy by doing something very simple. I redesigned the patrol tactics class, and I added more doing stuff. When I went through Basic, patrol tactics was watching videos, answering questions, and a 10-question quiz assessment. And I was like, I'm not learning trash. So when I took it over with one of our patrol lieutenants, I asked, "Can I redesign this?" And they said, "Sure." And what I did is the first 4 hours of the day, we talked about processes, methods, and tactics to demonstrations. The the last 4 hours of the day, we did scenario-based training.
Practical application.
Exactly. I had started an organization called Officer Survival Initiative, where I trained a bunch of civilians on how to conduct scenarios. No cops. Some of them have military experience because, depending on the level of interaction, I wanted them to have that skill set. So I trained them on how to use firearms, basically, but I let them be civilians. And then I would use those people as my role players when I brought them in. Because cops are going to fight like cops. Mm-hmm. Cops pretending to be drunk, cops pretending to be bad guys or suspicious become caricatures of the people that we actually see on the road. Part of this in our agent, one of the things I love that our academy did is for DUI training, we actually worked with drunks. We got dispatchers and families to come to the academy, get them drunk, and then people would have to do their DUI investigations.
All right.
Legitimately drunk people. And that's how training should be done. So after we were done with that patrol tactics class, every day, 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours practical scenarios. And it wasn't running and gunning and all that stuff. I scripted all my scenarios. I had gone to Simunitions, safety officer and Simunitions instructor course in 1998. I was there during Columbine. And the guy who was teaching that class was a retired SEAL. He said, this is why we do scenario-based training. This is why we do force on force. And I brought all that to the academy. So I started working with instructors on how to develop training that's going to stick, training where people actually have practical application. 2004, I took a sabbatical, went and finished my bachelor's degree in philosophy at the University of Utah. Tell people I have a BS in BS. Mm-hmm. Came back, finished my 2-year master's in criminal justice at Virginia Commonwealth University. While I was still working 30, 35 hours a week on the road. And as soon as I finished, graduated August 2006, I said, you know what? I'm tired of being a part-timer. I want to go full-time. I want to go on SWAT. I want to do all this stuff. I'm going to go ahead and go full-time. And I'm going to do that as soon as I'm done with my defensive tactics instructor's course. In my defensive tactics instructor's course, dude went too hard on fighting through a full Nelson and blew out my C6, C7 disc. So that ended my full-time dreams of going to the sheriff's office, and I was put on light duty. At first, they thought it was a shoulder injury, but after 3 years of fighting workman's comp, 3 years of having to live with chronic pain, they found out it was a neck injury. And when they found out it was a neck injury, they said, well, we're going to fight workman's comp. They do not take care of cops. They do everything they can to not pay for anything. I just want to be fixed. Right. I'm like, I don't care about settlements. I just want to be fixed so I can go back on the road and do my work. So after about 6 months of struggling financially, because I was doped to the gills on pills, I went cold turkey, became a raging a-hole for about 30 days because I didn't understand addiction at the time. And not that I was addicted, but my body was. Yep. So I quit cold turkey and I worked through the pain. And honestly, it was kind of dangerous for me to be working the road. But because I found out that if I worked more than 4 hours on the road, I was just stupid in pain. So I was dangerous. I shouldn't have been on the road. So instead, I put more time and energy into training, did more firearms instruction, did more firearms training, did more training at the academy, looked for ways of getting people training. So I developed a program where every Saturday we would have an 8-hour class so that people could go to five first Saturdays of the month to get their 40 hours per year that they need for their certification. So I was developing all this stuff, doing everything I could since I couldn't work the road. When the workman's comp had decided that they were going to let me go, my sheriff was kind enough to give me retirement credentials. So I was medically retired out of the sheriff's office in 2010. But since I couldn't work the road as much and I still need to feed my family, every cop has a side gig, right? Every cop who wants to earn is either doing an extra 50 hours of overtime or they have 2 or 3 other jobs on the side. And my other job was working for a DoD contractor doing counter surveillance and counter interrogation training for Defense Intelligence Agency. So I had a lot of experience in doing that training. That was a lot of fun too. Get to yell at colonels and captains and stuff. But I was hired full time as an instructional designer in 2007, August of 2007. After working with them, like, hey, we know that you're struggling financially. You've been working with us for 5 years. We have a job we think would be good for you, and it's right there in Fredericksburg. It's called instructional design. I'm like, what is that? Is it, you don't know what instructional design is? I said, no. They said, you've been doing it for
You've been really good at this. Yeah.
I'm like, what? And they said, there's a science and a process to creating training. I'm like, you effing kidding me? There's a science and a process to creating training? I've been building training and instructing for 13 years and had no idea that there's learning science, there's processes, there's methodologies to creating quality training. So I ended up working for the Defense Department until 2010. And they sent me to a 1-week class in instructional design. That class also was kind of trash. It gave us a lot of theory, but very little practical. Mm-hmm. And that frustrated me. But I had 13 years of experience. And the thing that I learned in going to this class is how much I got absolutely wrong, but also how much I had gotten intuitively correct. And that's pretty much the foundation of what I'm doing now, is that most law enforcement instructors have an intuition of how to do it. They're just completely unaware of this idea of instructional design. So when I was medically retired in 2010, I decided if I can't be a cop in Virginia, I don't want to be in Virginia anymore. Moved to Austin, Texas, struggled for a while. And I learned a lot about what society thinks about law enforcement. After about 6 years in Austin, I moved to Phoenix to work on a contract that I was supposed to have with Phoenix PD for a software I developed for tracking training, tracking firearms qualifications, maintenance and management, and tracking certifications. Ended up staying in Phoenix for about 8 years. And then I moved to College Station area, Texas, where I am now. Having worked in the corporate world, after all my law enforcement experience, I saw that the corporate world has a lot of really good stuff for learning and development also. That's what they call training in the corporate world. And I brought a lot of the experience and knowledge I had from training and teaching graphic design. After I'd finished my master's degree, I was teaching at community colleges. Later on, I've taught at universities in criminal justice, primarily, and philosophy. And it really opened my eyes to what is available and what's possible for law enforcement training. The thing that I learned, though, is that the corporate world doesn't respect anything that you learn in law enforcement. I literally had a VP of Rackspace, which is a big server farm company in San Antonio, tell me he didn't think that I would be a good employee because I couldn't work independently. And I'm like, what do you think we're doing for 12 hours a day, dude? Right. We're in a car by ourselves. Most law enforcement are in a car by themselves, going call to call, handling issues, stuff like that. And when I argued back with him, it's like, well, then you probably don't know how to take orders. I'm like, we're paramilitary. Are you freaking? I was like, look, if you just don't want to hire a cop because you have no idea what we bring to the table, just say that. Don't make up these BS excuses. It blows my mind that if you read a lot of business magazines, all these business leaders are complaining about not having employees who are capable of making quick decisions. Based on policy, under pressure, and in stress. And then I've been in job interviews as a corporate instructional designer. They're like, so can you handle stress? I'm like, so if I'm in a meeting, is somebody going to try to kill me? They're like, no. I said, then I'm going to be good.
It's not stressful. It's not stressful.
Yeah, it's not stressful. You know, I'll tell you what's stressful is trying to talk down two rival gang groups, 10, 15 dudes while you're waiting for backup who was at the shooting that one of the gangs did at the other side
5 minutes ago. Yeah, 5 minutes ago. Yeah.
And I'm the only guy there until the lieutenant shows up and doesn't get out of his car. But, so it's like you want people who make decisions. You want people who know how to do things like build training, make decisions, be able to guide and mentor people. That's law enforcement. But the corporate world sees law enforcement as like, oh, you just eat donuts, get fat, and write tickets and oppress the minorities. Like, no, we do a lot more than that. But I found out after I went self-employed in 2021 after being laid off twice within a year. Once because of COVID. Second time I was training manager for a mortgage company, and mortgage industry tanked the year after COVID. I was like, there's no security anywhere. I'm just going to do my own thing. So I started my own thing, but then I found out the other side of it, that I'd forgotten that law enforcement doesn't trust anything that comes from the corporate world.
Yep.
And justifiably. How many times have we had chiefs that talked about, well, law enforcement is customer service? Not really.
No.
If the dude's arguing with you, I'm sorry, customer's not always right, you're going to jail. You can pay your bar tab or go to jail. Well, I don't trust. It's like, dude, you've got options here. My options in customer service includes pepper spray and an aspeton.
Right.
Or I can talk nicely to you and take you to jail. So it's there too many times people have brought business concepts into the law enforcement world without addressing the vast differences. We're not a profit center in law enforcement. We can't measure metrics like you do key performance indicators, KPIs. You can't measure it in law enforcement like you do in a selling timeshare.
Widgets. Yeah.
So I spent a lot of this time trying to bring law enforcement concepts to corporate world, and they were blown away at how much better their people performed. For a while, I was being hired because I was fixing retention and fixing attrition. And the way I was doing that is that a lot of corporations, they hire people, they put them through a 2-week fire hosing, and then put them on phones.
Yep.
We have all talked to customer service who were very clearly not trained. It's because they just came out of their training. So I said, you need to add a middle step, scenario-based training. You need to have the 2 weeks of, let's structure this better. So we're adding on things instead of doing a block here and a block there. Let's build it. The key word now, the big favorite word now, is interleaving. That's been around for a long time. You just build on the past training. And then before you put them on the phones, you put them through a week of scenario-based training where they go through what I call mock OJT. And they learn to combine all those skills into one thing. You teach them all the sales software. You teach them all the websites they have to go to. You teach them all the packages. You teach them overcoming objections. And then you put them on a phone where they haven't had a chance to combine all that stuff. They sound like idiots. They piss off customers and they quit. Because now it's like, hey, you haven't made 15 sales this week.
And you lost customers or potential customers.
Yeah. It's like, well, because I still can't find that freaking drop down that was in training. Oh, that drop down doesn't exist. That training is like 3 years old.
We changed it. Yep.
Exactly. So the thing that blew my mind is that there's a lot of things that the corporate training world does very well, but there's a lot of stuff that they absolutely suck at. The same with law enforcement. Law enforcement does a lot of things that's very good, but there's a lot of things they suck at. One of the things that law enforcement training sucks at is growing, is maturing. We're still doing shit the way we were doing it in the 1970s.
Yeah, so I'm going to time you out for just a second here because you've mentioned quite a few things here. I want to go back real quick. Well, we're actually going back quite a few years to when you were originally working with SWAT teams and you were recognizing the gaps in their training. And because I think it plays into this, and you mentioned how you went out and got role players that weren't cops to be their opposition in some of their training sscenarios. So that would be an example of growing it and doing something a little bit differently. Right. I wonder then versus now, and you just said what you said, which was we're still doing things that we did back in the 70s, in terms of training. The gaps that existed then versus the gaps that exist now. What's grown and what's closed? I mean, what is better and what is, I guess there's kind of 3 ways of looking at it. What's gotten better, if anything? What's gotten worse? And what's basically staying the same? If you can summarize that, like just in kind of some larger concepts.
Right. I'd say that some of the things I'm going to start with the stuff we're doing well. You have more instructors because of social media. You have more instructors who are recognizing what it took me 13 years to recognize. There's stuff missing. There's got to be something else. So there's social media out there that's helping develop instructors who are motivated and want to improve, have more access to information. But some of the things that we're falling way behind the curve on is that we're not training instructors at the beginning to even know what the terminology is. Even now, I've had to change the name of one of my courses to Advanced Course Design instead of Instructional Design for Law Enforcement Instructors, because I have yet to meet one instructor who has ever heard the term instructional design, just like me. I had never heard that term either until I was hired to do it for the Department of Defense. So the other thing that law enforcement training is doing very poorly at is that, and it's not necessarily the instructor's fault, is that these instructor certification courses focus on presentation skills over anything else. Well, I tell people in the beginning of my courses, most of us believe that, yeah, there needs to be reform. Yeah, there needs to be change, but it's not more training because we have a crap ton of training out there already. Most of it is trash. We need better quality training. We need training that follows science, methodology, and processes. But a lot of academies don't see themselves as learning institutions, and most instructors don't see themselves as learning professionals. We have to change the paradigm. So we're falling behind, and we're just doing the same thing over and over again. But if we do it with more passion, we're still getting the same results.
Right.
So that's the whole purpose of what I do now, is trying to get the word out that there is a better way, that methodology and processes need to be in place, but there's a lot that needs to be fixed. One of the things that law enforcement is doing a lot better at also is scenario-based training. They're creating more scenario-based training, but they're not documenting it. They're not doing the research, the analysis that needs to be done to do scenario-based training, and they're not assessing it the way it needs to be done. So there's a lot of things to be hopeful for. The primary thing that I'm hopeful for is that I've been really surprised at how excited people are about what I've been posting on Instagram. I posted on Instagram just because I felt like I need a presence. I was like, are instructors really hungry for this stuff? I've been really surprised at how hungry for quality information. My first series, learning. Here's a good one about things we're doing very badly. My first series on Instagram was case law that supports learning science. Most training that I've evaluated and I've seen is still violating case law that was set in 1989. It's amazing at how we have case law that says these things have to be in training. And even in 2025, people are not adding these things to their training. They're not building.
So which creates all kinds of things from a liability perspective for everybody in that chain. So going back to, you mentioned, we don't necessarily need more training. We need better quality training. The information is out there. We are just not delivering it at the level that it needs to be. And I think that's, when people are, pardon me, I think when I say people, I just think the market kind of looks at it. It knows this. It knows like there needs to be better training. You're seeing it all the time, like through social media and people bagging on, one person for another. And maybe it's justified, maybe it's not. That's not my point. My point is quality of training can be measured. And there is a methodology and a science to doing this if set up properly and you educate people properly on how to do this. And that's where this is going and what we're getting to. Like, how would you do that? Because right now what we have is we have camps that are saying this sucks, right? There's a larger camp that says, yeah, we know it sucks. But this camp is saying, no, it sucks. And no, this is the expert now. And this is who you should be listening to. And maybe all of them are right at some level, but also all of them are a little bit wrong at some level too, not because they haven't been able to identify what would be quote unquote good or bad, but there's no metric to weigh what is good or what is really good or what is bad or what is really bad. And so what ends up happening is just this crossfire that continues to happen, and it leaves people in a vacuum of, well, how do we do it better? And again, there's some of those camps will be like, well, we do it better and here's why. And we've based this on research. Really? What research? What metrics? Those kind of things. And so that's where you're going with this, when you're talking about your, the hunger there is for, well, how do we do this better? And I think what I see you doing really well is just putting little I like to just call it like little truth bombs, or you start to ninja people's brains a little bit with like, maybe you think about it this way. And that's, I think, what people are hungry for, because they know it when they see it. They're just not sure how to maybe put the pieces together, or aren't quite sure.
Right. And there's multiple tiers that have created this situation. You go on Instagram. Instagram is one of the biggest bullying sites on the planet.
100%.
And I had to make it very clear at the very beginning, I'm not going to bully anybody on my platform, because if somebody is questioning whether or not they're a good instructor, I want them to feel safe talking to me. So I'm not going to bully anybody. But there are people out there who are idiots and are very proud of being idiots. I'm going to pass their information along to people like Tactard and Tac Tribe 2.0 and Field Training Otter. I'll pass it off to them. I suck at making memes. I'm going to leave it to those guys for Scorched Earth.
Right.
But, and I've built some really great relationships with those guys. But if you don't tell people, telling people you're wrong, telling people that you suck, doesn't do any good if you don't tell them how to not suck.
Yeah, what's the solution? Yeah. Don't bring me just a problem. Bring me a solution.
And I think that's just shut down a lot of the conversation. So 100%. I'm not going to say you suck balls and I think your training is trash. I'm going to say, look, there's a better way of doing this. If you let me, I'll show you how to do it. And that's the whole reason I put these courses together. Now, the problem is that I can train all the instructors on how to be better instructors, on how to manage a classroom, how to, I don't even call it classroom management, I call it classroom command. There's a different perspective that we have to bring to just training classrooms and professionals. Instead of academies treating people like they're 19-year-olds coming to basic training in the Marine Corps.
Yes.
A lot of them are in their mid-20s and 30s, and I'm not going to be yelled at by somebody. I need somebody barking at me. You need to treat them like professionals, or they're not going to act like professionals. We can train all the instructors on how to build great courseware. But if their admin and their academy people don't care, it's not going to do anything. It takes time to build quality training. It takes not just research, not just reading someone's abstract saying this many percentage of people do this thing. It's actually reading the methodology and statistical methods of how they came to that, to understand why they think that research is good. Not all, just because it says research doesn't mean it's good research. That was the other series I put up, is that we're measuring things badly. We're measuring the wrong things. There's tons of research. A lot of it is bogus, and a lot of it has agendas. So it has to start higher than the instructor.
Sorry, can you give me an example? Just give an example of like cherry picking research or bad research and it being non-supportive, yet somebody thinks that it is.
Oh, absolutely. My most absolute favorite one, and I'm really surprised I don't get hammered more for it than I do, is the research that shows that the Black citizens of the United States are 2.5 times more likely to be killed than whites. It's total bogus, total BS. And it's because they manipulated the statistics to make it sound worse than it is. When there's actual research that came out of Washington and out of, I believe, Harvard, that shows that blacks are actually less likely to be shot than whites. But also, if you look at the raw numbers, roughly about half the number of blacks have been killed by cops than whites. The way that they did it is they took the entire population of the United States, and that's in a book that I'm working on, the entire population of whites, and divided the number of white people killed by cops divided by the number of white people in the population. And then they compared it to the number of black people killed by cops divided by the population of black people in the United States. And that number is 2.5 times more than the white number. But it's and the reason it's dangerous is because
it impacts
entire policies have been based off this. Entire policies, entire training programs, entire academies have been adapted to that statistic. So you can say, well, research shows that blacks are killed 2.5 times more than whites. But if you don't know the research, you're passing a lie. You're making people afraid to act. And we've seen that in videos of cops who have gotten beaten up who have tased people with handguns and knives because they're afraid.
Yeah.
We're using those bad statistics.
And they were trained that way. They were trained that way.
Exactly.
They were doing exactly what they were trained to do.
Exactly. Bad research led to bad policy, led to bad training programs, led to fear. And it all started with instructional design. Someone took that policy and made an agenda-driven participant or instructor guide of maybe 2 pages of bullet points and said, this is what you're training. And then an instructor stood up with war stories and hit the points, and that's your training. And I have lots of
I'm sure.
other examples of that. It's all on the Instagram page.
It's interesting you picked that one too, and not for any other reason that I think it's probably the most obvious when you look at how it trickles down the line and what we're seeing now, again, with body cam footage and social media and how easily it's blasted out there. The outcomes are so very poor many times. And there's a lot of really great outcomes that we don't see, that aren't being publicized for all kinds of reasons. But I don't think there can be a lot of argument made to that. And again, going back, some of that research was exposed in this last couple of years. And I forget, when you mentioned the Harvard study, I forget the gentleman's name that did that. And he took a lot of heat for coming out and saying that. And when he did do that, if my memory serves me correctly, they came out with the results. There were some independent, auditors that were analyzing all this data. And when it came out that what you said is true, they actually redid the study because he's like, we better be really sure before we do this again. And they came out and they redid the study again with a new set of auditors. If I'm not mistaken, same results.
Exactly.
And so while people will want to argue that for all kinds of reasons, unsubstantiated reasons, emotional reasons, psychological reasons, whatever else, the truth is the truth at the end. And that again, that hits very much home when we look at kind of what's happening out on the streets today. And then again, what our officers, what our law enforcement agencies and what our citizens are faced with on a regular basis.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a laundry list of stuff out there that we could get down into.
Oh, yeah. The thing that's missed, though, is that if you use the same methodology that they used for that statistic of 2.5 times, you take the percentage of population divided by the number of offenders, using that same methodology, it showed that Black citizens are 1.8 times more likely to be arrested. And it shows that Black offenders are 3 times more likely to assault law enforcement. They don't include that in their research because that sends a different message.
A different message.
If it's 2.5 times, they're resisting 3 times and they're only being shot 2.5 times, maybe they're actually not doing a bad job. The problem is that by ignoring those statistics, they're ignoring the real problem. The real problem is not law enforcement. It's like, why are 3 times as many population assaulting law enforcement? It's a cultural issue.
We have a societal cultural issue here.
Yeah,
big time.
It's a social demographic issue. We're so worried about fixing cops as if cops are the problems. I've said it before. If cops are showing up the door, society has already failed. Period. We're not the reason that people are going to jail. We're the result of people making poor choices and society creating an environment where they felt that they had to, if you want to take the benefit of the doubt, or they chose to because they weren't afraid for cops to show up at the door.
So is it also fair to say then, on the flip side of that, for law enforcement, they're also making poor decisions more than they were in the past based on the information that's been provided to them and the training that they've gotten in order to know or respond to those particular situations?
Yeah, it's a setup for failure because we're using bad data. We have bad training, and we might have great instructors providing bad training who are then creating poorly trained cops who are motivated, excited, hardworking, and they just trust their instructors. Mm-hmm. We trust our instructors. Our instructors trust the content, and our content is trusting the research. But if we don't do an analysis of everything down that, we have really good cops going out doing really bad things but for no other reason than they were set up to failure by a lack of instructional design, a lack of analysis, and a lack of understanding the research.
It's broken. That's the broken model of policing is, and this could be all kinds of things, So, okay. So then the next question obviously would be, all right, well, how do we make it better? And how do you untangle this sticky web, right? Of what's been laid down. There's like this matrix of stuff that's going to have to be carved through from the top to the bottom and the bottom back up. Again, we're still doing the same things we've been doing for 30, 40, 50 years. And then there's things that have changed that have made it worse. And then there are some things that maybe have changed that have gotten a little bit better. Where do you start to peel back? Like, how do you attack this? How do you eat the elephant? Right? Is kind of the question here.
It's more like eating a herd of elephants at this point.
Yeah.
It's it's a multi-pronged attack. The number one problem that we have to fix first is the will of administrations to not use their training as a compliance tick the box. Mm. Too many administrations are saying we haven't been sued yet, so we must be doing well. Yep, that's not a metric of success.
That's the metric. It's about the lowest thing you could ever come across. Yep.
It's what can we get away with the least? It's like minimum standards aren't the standards of good performance. That's the minimum standard that they meet so they don't get sued. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that they're performing well. That means that they can justify defending themselves in a lawsuit. So the first step is getting administration to recognize that high-performing police will produce lower lawsuits. At the very least, you're never going to prevent lawsuits. You're going to reduce lawsuits. But you also have to make sure that those police have everything in place, your people have everything in place, that your training manager shouldn't just be the guy who goes through a spreadsheet to make sure people have had their training. He should be leading a learning team. He should be leading the learning professionals. You have to get admin to recognize that it takes time to build quality training. But once you build quality training, you have something that we don't have in most agencies and most academies. You have a standard. If you're training, it's like imagine you're in an academy class or any class at all. And the instructor comes in and says, okay, we're going to start testing everybody. We're going to evaluate you on your performance. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to come up and ask each one of you 5 questions. Everyone's going to get 5 different questions, but each of you are going to have 5 questions to answer. Mm-hmm. Well, how do you know if it's right? I'll just know if you're right or not. I don't have a tool that says that you're right, but I just know you're going to be right or not. Do you feel like that's a very just and fair? There's
way too much ambiguity there.
Ambiguity and subjectivity.
Yeah.
But yet we hold our law enforcement personnel accountable to ambiguous and subjective training, and we don't evaluate instructors because we don't have materials that we can hold them accountable to objectively and consistently. So it starts with admin allowing a training manager or a training lieutenant or whoever is going to be in charge of training to start creating the standards for training, which is high quality training materials. When you have high training quality materials, now you have an objective document that you can hold all the instructors accountable to. This is what we did in the military. I'm not just making this stuff up. This is what we did in the Personnel Recovery Education Training Center that I worked for. I ended up writing the operation instruction for creating training for that schoolhouse. And it was so freaking eye-opening. We created training that was like textbooks. All of our participant guides were textbooks. The participant guide for my advanced course design is over 150 pages. Everything is documented. All of my assessments, all my scenarios, everything is documented. Until we have that level of training material, you have no idea what the instructors are doing. You have no idea if they're a good instructor. The end of course surveys are trash, by the way. They're Likert scales, or what we call in the corporate world smile sheets. They don't tell you anything about that. But until you have
good, it's either poor, fair, or good. You know, it's basically that. And what does that mean? What's the spectrum there on good, fair, or fair, poor, or good?
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
What does that tell me? I'm a 3.8 instructor. What does that mean? That doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah. So I guess just going back to kind of the basics of this and instructional design and learning methodology, those two fit in together. You've hit some key points here. Like, obviously, there's an adult learning process, and people learn very similarly, but there are nuances to how they do that. There's the scenario-based learning, which you talked a little bit about already, and specifically, you mentioned how you build your scenarios, that they're scripted, that they're documented, and then within there was some experiential or application stuff that you used. Again, you mentioned like in the dealing with drunks or dealing with opposition in maybe in the shoot house or something. You didn't say that specifically, but people that don't fight like cops. A citizen, Joe Blow fighting.
Yep.
And then I would imagine there's some type of like blended learning, where you have to put it all together, and there has to be a time and a place to be able to do this. And while you're doing that, you have to be able to evaluate what's getting through, what isn't getting through, what are people advancing on, what are they not advancing on. So there's all these different components. And you mentioned like there has to be an acceptance of this from from an administrative level. And that I think is usually where the major complaint comes back to, is like admin is just not on board with this, and they're not going to be. That I think is, for me from the outside looking in, is like always the biggest thing to tackle. And I mean, you've had a lot of experience at a lot of agencies, at a lot of for the government, municipal agencies, for the corporate world. Like, what's the trick? Like, what's the hack there, if there is one, to get that through?
Well, that's the big question and all those fears. The military is probably the easiest one, because the reason we have the best military in the world, and we literally do, is because of training doctrine. There's a framework called ADDIE: analyze, design, develop, implement, evaluate. That was designed by the military in the 1970s to structure how courses would be developed, so that all courses were developed the same way in all the branches. That's why you can go from the Army to the Air Force to the Marine Corps, and they almost all have the same doctrine with a taste of the policies and procedures of that branch. It takes the top levels of the military preserve training. When under the Clinton administration, when they were cutting training and all that stuff, guys were training themselves. They're going out and getting it. You see that in law enforcement now, where a lot of cops, a lot of instructors are paying with their own dime and time to get this training.
Which goes back to what you were saying. Sorry to interrupt, but which goes back to what you're saying, and that these officers are hungry. They want to know. They want this information.
They want to be good cops.
They're paying for it out of their own pocket to go, and there's a market for it there, which can become problematic, obviously, but they want this. So it's not like you're fighting the officers. Well, you're going to be fighting some of them. There's always a spectrum there.
Yeah.
You're going to be fighting some of them, but the majority is telling I'd say, again, there's no metric to measure this, but I'd say the better majority, those that want to be better, those that are looking to increase their skill sets and know that they're doing the right thing, because they don't trust what they've gotten, and that comes from a lot of, whether their buddy who's in the neighboring department got in trouble for doing the thing that they were trained to do, that I've been trained to do, and I'm looking at like, well, something's not right here. Like, I need to get better at this. My point being is people are seeking this stuff. So I don't think you're fighting the officers. They will take what you give them, right? So it's not that.
It's so admin number one has to have the will to make this change. They have to recognize that a better performing law enforcement is fewer lawsuits, but also happier performing law enforcement. But the number two thing is that they have to enforce standards. If you're going to have quality training materials, you have to hold your instructors accountable. If they don't teach according to the training materials, they shouldn't be instructors.
They can't be there, right?
I had this conversation with an academy director from a state I'm not going to mention. He's like, I got all these old guys who don't want to teach what I'm giving them. Fire them. You're the academy director. If you have quality materials that have everything laid out, this is what needs to be in there, and you provide room for anecdotes so they can tell the war stories, because those are still necessary to creating relevancy to the training, then you have a standard. You can say, this is what you teach. If you don't cover a piece, or if you and add something to it that's not in there, you're going to be held accountable. You're going to be fired as an instructor. That's how you have to build accountability. But because we've been in a race for lower standards for so many years, we've lost track that if we improve standards, if we hold people to higher standards, you're going to have harder working, maybe fewer cops to start, but you want quality people. You have to create a quality environment for them to be in. No quality cop wants to be in an agency full of fat, underperforming cops. Mm-hmm. They're not just thinking, I look unprofessional. They're like, that dude's going to die trying to help me in a fight. Right. Or I have to fight for the two of us now.
Right.
I've been in that where I call for backup and I heard dude respond, I'm coming to back you up. I'm like, never mind.
No,
I'm good.
No,
under
not.
Control. And I fought for another 3 minutes so I could get that person under control because I didn't want him screwing things up. So if they recognize that if you improve quality of training, you improve the quality of your people, you hold people to a standard, you say, you're not meeting a standard, you got to go. Now you're going to start improving law enforcement with society and the community as well. Nothing is achieved by going low.
So I wonder, like, what's the disconnect? Is the disconnect because they're generally short timers, that being admin, who are not in a position long enough to implement something that makes sense for them in terms of getting credit for or being valued for, or even if they are, they know they're not going to be there long enough to see the thing through the length of time it's going to take in order to get there. Oh, what's the disconnect?
I always try to hedge on the side of the benefit of a doubt. Mm-hmm. And I honestly, truly believe, just like I was for my first 7 years as a law enforcement instructor and as a cop, and in the first 13 years of being an instructor and an educator and all that, it's a lack of knowledge. All these, in order to get to admin, you have to be an instructor. All those instructors went through an instructor certification course. All those instructor certification courses spent 2 hours on how to create training and 38 hours on how to present. The presentation isn't the problem. We can develop presentation skills a lot more easily than we can create quality training materials. So it's a lack of knowledge. When they come up the chain, it's not that they're like, I hate training and I think training is useless. It's that they don't know what they don't know. So they don't know what to look for and they don't know how to improve it. Just like when I was told the term instructional designer existed, I was like, are you freaking kidding me? It was like lights went off, clouds departed, angels herald. It's like, there's a way of doing this better. So the biggest problem is just a lack of knowledge. I think
getting them to see that, getting them to see what you just said, having them have that moment.
Exactly. But it takes proof. It's going to take one leader in the agency to say, I just heard this podcast on Ironsight's podcast, and he was talking about stuff I've never heard about before. I want to fix these things. How can we do that? Number one, start with improving the paradigm of your training as a learning professional group, not compliance checkboxing. That's the number one thing to do. Number two, have standards. I bet you could go through 100 SOPs, and none of those SOPs have anything about how we process, how we create training. No process on that. Also, how do we evaluate the quality and efficacy of an instructor? They have no evaluation process. They have no course design process. They don't have any instructor development process. People can say, I want to go to an instructor certification course. Okay, there you go. You're an instructor now.
So what we're measuring is the outcomes that person is supposed to be helping somebody achieve, right? Let's say on the officer or candidate side of things in the academy, like you pass the physical fitness qual, you pass this test on legal, you pass this, firearms qualification or standard or whatever it is. And those people are being held accountable, but they're being held accountable to how that information is delivered. The person that's actually delivering the information, there's no accountability and there's no standard for them. That seems pretty problematic.
It's very little. If there is a standard, it's the smile sheet. Hey, you did really well for this class. One of the academy that I taught in, they had a brand new basic coordinator, and she did not like the lead instructor that I came in with. We had 2 patrol tactics courses that went off beautifully. So much so that immediately afterwards they do their DUI investigation. the state police took us aside and like, what did you guys do to this class? Like, what do you mean? We have never seen any patrol class come through that were completely locked in on their officer safety and could do an investigation. It was amazing. We didn't have to go over any of that stuff. That was great work. But then we got this new basic coordinator who didn't like this new lieutenant, and we got a crap class. You're going to have every class has a group psychology.
Yep.
And if you have a class that's full of complainers, whiners, and lazy people, it's a bad class.
That's what you're going to get.
Yeah, it was her first class, and she believed that the participants could do no wrong, and they complained all the time, even though they performed very well, and they did very well in DUI investigations. So she decided that all of us weren't going to teach at the academy anymore, because we had smile sheets with people whining about, well, I didn't like the lunch this week or something like that.
Yeah, can we start at 8, not 7 a.m.? Can we start at 8 a.m.?
Exactly.
I just saw that at a recent event. I was like, really, man?
Right.
Okay.
And my academy was 100% dependent on volunteer instructors. So you had 3 or 4 major largest agencies there were 65 agencies served by our academy. There were about 5 that provided instructors all the time. And it was all volunteer, and they wore them out. So eventually they would stop.
Right.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Forgot to turn that off.
It's all good.
That was my alarm that says my wife loves me. I need a constant reminder. Anyway, so their only evaluation of an instructor's performance is, did anybody die? And what does the smile sheet say?
Right.
And smile sheets are 1 through 5. Do you like them? Do you not? It just becomes popularity. It's just a popularity thing. There's actually a book out there called Performance Survey. It's by a gentleman named Will Tallheimer. It's I just lost it. Performance Focused Learner Surveys. I took his class. It's a completely different concept of doing surveys, and you get actionable intelligence out of it. You're able to write a survey where learners or participants or students, whatever you want to call them, have to answer questions. They're not writing blocks, because nobody wants to do that either, but their questions guide on the efficacy, the applicability of the training, things that they experience, that kind of thing. And it gives you something to change your training with. It gives you something to improve your presentation or your materials or things like that. But it takes effort, it takes time, and it takes review. Mm-hmm. And a lot of academies and agencies don't want to spend the time on it. But more so, they don't understand that this is based off science and research that actually has been tested, not just a methodology read somewhere.
So let's talk a little bit about some of this methodology and how it actually gets implemented. When we just talk about recommending changes to current training process and programming, and how this should be set up. So we talked about the smile sheet, not good. We talked about the current evaluation sheet, probably doesn't even, or evaluations, they probably don't even exist for the instructor. Talked a little bit about the challenges of actually getting it implemented. But once you're into this, like what's the basic? When I say basic, I don't think it's basic. I think it's actually very complex. It doesn't have to be complicated, but there's a lot of complexity to it. And I think if people are still with us here and they're like, yes, we need that. What would this look like? What should I expect of myself as an instructor? Or what should I expect of my instructors as an administrator? And as a student, what should I expect of my instruction and of me as the student in terms of providing feedback for that instruction? Because a lot of students, I think, wish they had a vehicle or a voice in giving more feedback to it, but generally it's just shut up and take what you passed, namaste, have a good day. It's cover your ass, it's check the box, it's the smile sheet, you move on, you move to the next school, or you move to the next test, or you move to the next thing, whatever it is. So I guess if we could, let's pull back the lens here a little bit for a second, just kind of talk about how that's structured, and then we can maybe dig down or drill down to like, what would the system look like and how could it be implemented?
Right. That's a very
it's a big
large
question. It's a big question. I know. And so to give some context to where this is coming from, you have put together a very complex, very detailed process for delivering certain types of training. And I've read through that, and it is extensive. This could be 4 or 5, this could be a whole series of podcasts and going through kind of section by section on the things that are in there. But I'll tell you this, it was the thing that probably encouraged me the most. I was already encouraged to talk to you, but it was the thing that encouraged me the most because of my personal experience in training. And I'm not law enforcement, and I've never been in the military, so I have not been indoctrinated in any kind of a system, but I have worked in corporate America, and I do own my own business, and I do have employees that need to be trained to perform certain functions and have to have a certain level of skill in order to manage people, manage their outcomes, whether it be health, fitness, or whatever else, customer service, if we want to talk about that. And I had an experience with a very large company that put a lot of money, a lot of investment of time, money, resources, and professionals into a training program that I was involved in. And it was about setting up how the training should look and how you actually deliver it. And then how do you measure whether or not it's actually working or not. Now that had happened way before I ever got there. So I was getting what basically was the training doctrine of this company by the time I arrived. And I was surrounded by people that were not from the industry this company was in, but they were from the outside, much like you were coming in going, hey, this is how you deliver a training program. And if you put this together the right way, then you will see better outcomes. And they did, from sales, customer service, let's just say operational or organizational management. There's all kinds of things that went into it. Was this very similar process for all of those different types of trainings. And it just got used over and over and over again. And it was able to be rolled out for a Fortune 500 company that had over 400 locations. Each one of those locations had anywhere from 20 to 100 employees that all did different things. And it was very, very good. Obviously, it's only as good as the people you're training at the end of it. So the recruitment, and hiring and development process was all part of this too. But I'm saying it, I want to go through it because when I was reading this, I was going, this is exactly what I went through in corporate America. Exactly. And I ended up becoming one of those instructors. That's why they sent me to this school, so that I could deliver the information. And when I jumped into, again, my personal experience, jumping into kind of the firearms instruction world, when I started to explore this more, and then I got to spend time with some law enforcement agencies and how they instructed, that was my thing. I was like, dude, there are so many gaps here. Like, this could be so much better.
Yeah.
Like, this person has the capability to do this, but they clearly have not been given the information or the pathway in order to be able to do it better. So let's talk about how to do it better and the things that how you can kind of break that down. Again, I know it's a huge question, Rick. I know it's a huge one, but if we can try and tailor this thing for the audience.
Well, honestly, the very first thing you have to have is that a lot of people think training is about performance, about outcomes, things like that. But actually, it gets a little more basic than that. Training is about accountability. You're holding people accountable to whether they performed or whether they don't. The performance part is essential to it because that's one of the goals, is we want people to perform. But ultimately, training is about accountability. You can't have accountability if every training iteration is different. Mm-hmm. If you have one instructor delivering the same course differently to different people with different information, or even worse, you have multiple instructors delivering the same course with completely different information. I've seen it in basic training in law enforcement. I've seen it in the corporate world, where you'd have 3 basic trainings going on at the same time, and you would have 3 sets of classes doing things completely differently.
No continuity, which compromises the integrity of what you're trying to do.
Exactly. And you just hit on it. The only way you can get to accountability is through consistency and continuity. If you have no consistency, you can never have continuity. If you have no continuity, you can't truly have accountability. but we hold people accountable all the time to the training that we provide. Consistency is not 8 bullet points. And there's an activity I do at the very beginning of my class. I'm not going to do the spoiler alert, but there's an activity that I do, I'll tell you offline, that really drives it home. I did this activity at a conference for Law Enforcement Directors Association, and you can just see the light bulbs go off. Without quality materials, but where do the quality materials come from? It comes from an established process. That's what I learned from Prezi, is that I was building training, but I was doing exactly what the instructor courses told me to do. You got an idea, put it in a PowerPoint, make an outline, that's your course.
PowerPoints.
Yeah, PowerPoint is like one of the last things you do in reality. When I learned about ADDIE and I found the framework, then I had to learn all the processes that fit in that framework. And I give it away for free on LinkedIn. I give it away for free on my website. I have a list of all the processes I go through in ADDIE. People see that and they have two reactions. Holy Mother of Green, this is a lot of shit.
Yep.
But also, thank heaven, this is something I can actually apply.
Yeah, it's very applicable. It's not overly complicated.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and it's just step-by-step approach to doing it. So the first thing that an admin can do, whether academy or agency, is to create a course development process. It's governance. And part of that process has to include using science and research and learning knowledge in applying these processes. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's the other thing that blew my mind. Every company I went to, they thought that they had invented learning and development. Yeah. They thought they were the first ones that discovered performance objectives.
This is proprietary.
Yeah. Well,
this is our secret weapon.
We do calisthenic based training styles of training. It's like, no, that's trash, number one. And number two, nobody's ever learned that way. But you have to establish policy and procedure. That's one of the things that when I consult with some corporations, I've consulted with some academies, I tell them, you've got to have a documented governance, documented policy and process. So if you have an instructor that comes in, say that Joe Bob wants to be an instructor. Okay, Joe Bob, read our SOPs on how we develop training and how we're going to evaluate you as an instructor. That process also has to include review processes, which means you have to have people willing to read other people's work and criticize it. Not, hey, no, that sounds great, buddy. It's like, no, dude, this doesn't make sense. Once you have the policies and the procedures and the governance in place, now you can hold your training cadre accountable. And if you start holding your training cadre accountable to establish policies and procedures, now you have more accountability for your people.
Well, yeah, buy in, and you also have an engaged participant in making that process better.
Right.
Because if I'm being held accountable to this, and I'm 1, struggling with it, 2, seeing that it's not working, or 3, seeing that it is working, like I win in that situation every single time if I'm providing feedback and I'm being held accountable to it. Because I'm being held accountable to it, I want to be involved in that process, not just taking instruction or parroting whatever you're telling me I'm supposed to say.
Exactly. Actually, Pat from Apex Training and I are going to have a live on Instagram here soon. And what we're talking about is Academy and FTO supposed to be a weeding process? I'm taking the hard stance is that no, basic training and FTO is not a weeding process, but it's also not a building process. It's an assessment process, an assessment of meeting standards. But if you don't have standards, you can't hold them accountable to it.
Right.
And so by having an established governance, policies, procedures, process for developing courses, evaluation process for your instructors, they're going to focus on something else that a lot of people get wrong. We don't want to focus on the outcomes, because in law enforcement, focusing on the outcomes assumes that everyone we're dealing with is an input-output machine. It's the same thing in sales. Do you train people to overcome objections? All the sales training I've ever worked on, we got to train people how to overcome objections.
Yep.
We base it off on all the A performers. A performers are outliers, just like the failures. It's your B performers that are telling you how to do the work. The difference between an A performer and a B performer is not their ability to overcome objections. It's their ability to identify someone who can have objections overcome.
Right.
But when in basic training, they're training people overcome objections, and you hear them on the phones, they're spending 20, 30 minutes trying to get somebody who just will not buy to buy.
And then it gets ugly. Then it gets ugly.
So you're measuring the outcomes like, well, you didn't sell anything. You must be a failure. No, you didn't teach them how to perform. You should have trained them how to overcome objections. But more importantly, the A performers are making more phone calls because they can immediately identify the people who are most likely to buy. That's why they're A performers.
Yep, moving on. Yep.
Same thing with law enforcement. We base our performance, or we base our outcomes off of how many bodies dropped this year. That's not a metric.
Did crime go down? Did crime go down?
Yeah, did crime go down? We don't have a control over that. All we can measure is how well did I perform. I have a buddy of mine who went through all the critical incidents training, negotiation training, had a master's in counseling, and he was called to a suicidal subject. He did everything by the book. He did outstanding performance. At the end of the hour and a half that he was talking to this guy, the guy had his gun down by his side. He's like, no, I appreciate all the time you spent with me. Thank you for talking to me. And then blew his head off. The way we measure performance now is the outcome. Technically, my friend failed. But if you measure the performance and you accept that the people we're dealing with have a choice, they get a vote. He performed absolutely 100%, but he can't overcome this person's decision. This person still gets to make a decision. So we need to change, our focus on what we're aiming for to do they perform? Because if we focus on the performance, the outcomes will be impacted as well. If we focus on performance now and our training materials support performance, when somebody gets in trouble, the first thing they can do is go to the training material. Did they follow policy and procedure and the quality training material? Not the bullet points. Then they go to the instructor. Did the instructor deliver everything and assess everything correctly? They did. Now we go to the body-worn camera, or we go to the report. He did exactly what he was supposed to. There's no liability here. You can't do that now.
No, you hit all these. I don't know if people are picking this up. So, I had to go back just real quick while you were talking through there and kind of review those points. So you mentioned, there's this trickle down and then it goes back up. So there's a waterfall down, there's a waterfall back up. Like, did we train this person? Did this person do the right thing? Like, how do we know? Well, we go back and review the training system, and did they teach them to do these things, or was this person working off some, again, ambiguous smiley sheet, kind of thing? Right. So let's go back to the top just in terms of, like, right now we have a smiley sheet with no accountability, right? What would we have to have some metrics. There has to be some type of a scoring system, like, for the instructor. And then obviously that trickles down to the officer in the particular incident or whatever. What's the right kind of scoring system look like? And how does it get implemented or utilized? Not implemented, but how does it get utilized?
Right. So I will give you a spoiler on this. In the classroom command class I provide, it's an advanced instructor development course. One of the things we teach, and this is a word that few law enforcement instructors have ever heard before, it's a rubric. A rubric is a matrix of performance.
Yeah, okay.
What I do is I have them in the class. They all sit down in teams, and they work on what are the top 10 attributes of a good instructor do we want. They go through and they decide what those top 10 are. Then I have the teams argue and debate and come up with a solid list. And they think, no, this is a great idea. I know what an instructor is. Later in the course, say, now we're going to build a rubric to that. And that is their evaluation sheet. And the rubric isn't just, he did this and he didn't do that. You can't have it. It has to be specific.
That's a tick box.
Yeah, exactly. It's communicated without using obscenities, communicated articulately, and communicated the information correctly. There's a bunch of ways you put the standard in the box and you make it clear. Did they say these things or not? Did they, when they walked into the classroom, did they acknowledge people or not? But a lot of people will use a checklist. You did something, you didn't do something. Well, if I apply handcuffs and I fumble for half an hour, you can tick the box, he applied handcuffs.
Right.
But it doesn't tell you how well I did. So you create rubrics And the rubrics become an objective third-party tool to take the personality out of assessing the performance of the instructors. But I also use rubrics in all of my scenarios, so that it's shocking how many academies in the United States use scenario-based training. And when it comes down to it, you ask the instructor, how did you decide they perform well? Well, based on my background training experience. No, that's subjective, and it's could be personality driven.
Another analogy would be here, just looking at the target. Like, did you hit the target? Checkbox.
Yeah.
Okay, but where did you hit the target? Right.
Exactly.
And then on a hit factor scoring, what does that actually mean? Was that an alpha, Charlie, delta? Was there a mic on there? And how does that work? So when you're looking at, you kind of went through like 4 tick boxes, or 4 boxes, 4 things they're being evaluated on. There's a weighted score that ends up happening there. Now we can measure this. He did use, profanity or obscenities in his story. He didn't do this, or he did do that, or whatever. And at the end, now you have these scores for these different sections. And at the end, that can be measured. And then we obviously then now have something we can objectively go back to and improve or correct.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. It has to be objective. It has to be based on research. It has to be based on consensus. So if you're going to have a training team, you put your cadre together, you decide what your top 10 attributes you want in quality instruction. One of those things has to be, can follow the instructor guide. And then you observe. You have people observe. But that's the biggest problem that we have in law enforcement training. Isn't that we don't have enough training, it's that we don't know how to measure performance. And most of our measurements, if it's not a 10-question quiz, multiple choice quiz, it's all subjective and personality based.
Yep.
When I went through basic training, there was an instructor I did not get along with. And when he and I were always, he tried to talk me out of being law enforcement. And I finally said, look, man, this has been the worst experience I've ever had in training. You have no objectivity. You told me to ignore the gunshots in one place. Now you're pissed at me that I ignored them in another place. And our practicals, you have no scoring sheet. It's just based on how you feel. That is not a proper assessment. He didn't realize he was dealing with somebody who kind of knew what they were talking about.
Right.
But
right.
That's a big problem. So
well, I think that people, listening to this can relate to that, right? Again, if I'm not asking you this, but if we ask for a show of hands from the audience right now, like how many people have experienced that type of training, whether it be inside the institution or even from a third party, right? I bet every single person listening right now is like, yep, I know exactly what that looks and feels like. And maybe they weren't the subject of that like you were in this particular instance, but they watched it happen or know that it's happened to somebody else. There's probably not a person listening to this that hasn't experienced that.
A couple of years ago, I went to Colombia to train with the Colombian National Police. We were training them on how to create written and scenario-based training and assessments. Part of that program is they came to the United States and they toured a number of police academies on the East Coast and the West Coast. And they would ask the instructors, what are the rubrics you're using for assessing your scenario-based? Can we see them? Like, well, we don't need them. It's based on background training and experience. Colombians were stunned. They're like, you're not using an objective tool for measuring performance? They were surprised by that. And some of these academies are very well-known and respected academies who still haven't learned to apply learning science, learning tools, learning processes to their training.
Yeah. So as you go down the sort of this rubric, so there'd be all of these different specifics that would be getting would be required, right? And then there's a measurement system, so everything has a score. You already talked about getting those instructors involved in this process and how they would put that together, or those in charge of the instruction process, the training managers, so forth. And then as you start to go down these scores, this is where other things start to come up, because now if this isn't being done properly, and we know it's not being done properly for the majority of all the things, pardon me. But now we get into this whole concept of liability, right? And if you have this very subjective training tick the box process, then where does the liability lie? On the officer, the agency, the city, the larger agency, or government body, whatever it is. it makes it too easy for it to be shifted to somebody subjectively versus objectively. That's the thing that I have the biggest challenge with. And I think we're seeing that now, so much so that now policies are being created to make officers personally liable for decisions that they're making in the street based on a check the box, smiley face type of training process.
Yeah, we're creating this gulf between what we expect from an officer and what we're giving an officer to be able to do what we expect them to do. And we have to flip the script. We have to flip the script. If we're not providing them everything they need to be successful and perform well, then it's the agency that's accountable. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that, case law comes down to it. And a lot of the case law that I posted about supporting learning science, overwhelmingly, it was the instructor and it was the agency that was held liable because the guy did what he was told to do. Mm-hmm. He did according to what he received training. And unless we're giving people that, we don't have the defense. And I tell people this all the time. It's like, what's going to be more impressive? You go to court and you say, based on my background, training, experience, and here's my 2-page, 15 bullet point list of my 1 week course. Or you go to court and you say, based on research, observation, and analysis, and hand them a 400-page folder of all your analysis, design, development, evaluation, implementation, reviews, court cases, citations, all that stuff. What's going to be more impressive? Most attorneys,
defense attorneys,
not the plaintiff attorneys. They're not going to want to go through 400 pages of documentation and be like, oh crap, this guy's actually done the work.
Put together. Yeah, he's put together here.
And I have a friend of mine who is a post director and a general instructor. He was post director, law enforcement, and when he retired, his job was going around and doing that to training materials. He was hired as an expert witness, and he was frustrated because if people aren't going to learn by choosing to do it, then it's going to take a court to force them to do it. But if they take a court to force them to do it, they're not going to do it the right way either.
No,
and we see that now.
Quickest way to the end.
Yeah, and we see that now with how much training still doesn't meet case law standards.
So it's interesting. You don't have to reach back very far. Let's just go back in the last 5 years and all the policy changes that have been made based on things that have happened. And we'll just call it, quote unquote, air quotes here, recent events, going back to things like, and the things that we're dealing with. So like, as an example, the George Floyd case, that it came out after all the stuff went down. There were so many things that happened there, but that came out after that officer performed exactly what he was trained in the academy and through his defensive tactics training was trained to do. It was in the manual. It was in the guide. There were videos of this training, and that was not permissible in court at the time. They wouldn't even allow that to be brought in, which is a whole other issue. Right. But whether that was the right thing or the wrong thing, I'm not going to sit here and try to have that conversation. Whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing, specific to how he handled that officer or those officers handled that situation. That was an instance where there was too much ambiguity. There was too much box ticking. There was nothing to say what I just said, which was, this is exactly how this officer was trained. And if he shouldn't have been trained that way, then who's really liable for it? And he ends up going to jail for it. Again, on the liability side. So as an officer, I would want these changes. I would want that training as an agency, as a city, as a county or whatever. I would want these things to be implemented so that we don't wind up in situations like that, to your point, where we hand over a 400-page manual, videos of how this stuff was done and how it's done, and a scoring system. This is actually where this officer, the date, the time, the instructor, this is the instructor scores for doing the things. I would want all of that stuff. That's just my outside looking in, going like, how do we make it better, and how do we get to a different point with this?
Well, I have a very specific feeling about that whole thing. And I've told some people about it, and I've gotten a little bit of hate for it, but I absolutely stand behind it.
It's always going to be, it's either going to be popular or unpopular. Those are your choices. There's no in between on this.
I haven't heard anybody make this point yet. I don't think I'm the only person, but I haven't heard this anywhere else. If you watch the video of that whole thing happening, I would ask the question, how many people are including in their defensive tactics courses, in their patrol tactics courses, in their officer survival tactic courses? How many of them have crowds of unruly, threatening people standing around them while they're conducting these things? Now, I'm sure you've been in an emergency here and there, right? You've ever broken an arm, needed stitches, things like that.
Too many times.
How much did time compress?
Oh yeah.
When you feel threatened, you seem like a really nice guy. I probably have never been in a fight, but imagine that you got in a fight somewhere.
Things get pretty hanky. Get pretty hanky. Yep.
Yeah. When I looked at what happened with Derek Chauvin, I didn't see somebody who was oppressing a minority. I saw somebody who stopped because there was chaos going around. There were a bunch of people going around, harassing him, yelling at him, distracting him. That time compressed. I don't believe he knew how long he was on his neck because the crowd had distracted him. He didn't know if he was going to get attacked. He didn't know if they're going to have to fight. He didn't know if he was going to have to let him go so he could defend himself. The people that were with him, they were distracted too. The crowd is what caused that problem. It wasn't Derek Chauvin. So many people got up in his business and he hadn't been trained to be able to balance those two things. Just like I was talking about with tier 1 tech support. If you're not used to using computer software and you're not used to, having to make a sale, having to explain something, having to look up a DNS record, how to check a website all at the same time, you're not going to do it well the first time you're hit with that.
Right.
So I think the training failed in that. I wonder, was he ever in a hostile crowd while having to put handcuffs on somebody?
Great question.
How many times does it happen? It happens all the flipping time. But how many people are being trained with that?
I don't know the answer to that, but my gut, it would be to tell me probably none. Probably none. Or it was a 30 to 45 minutes of a section of some training that they had at some point where maybe you got a rep or maybe you watched somebody else get a rep doing it, but there was certainly there's nothing objectively that could be measured there with any kind of value and that's what my gut's telling me.
He was faced with it. He and those guys were with him were faced with a situation that they weren't ready for. And, we've seen, people are attacking law enforcement and all this chaos going on. We need to train people more realistically, but a lot of basic training is still one person at the front of the classroom, 50 people staring back at him, dead-eyed, waiting, counting the minutes to lunchtime.
Yeah, watching a PowerPoint.
Experiential training.
Watching a PowerPoint. Yeah. So again, I wanted to bring up the liability concept here and how it trickles down. And I think there's a sense, people get a sense of this, of that it's not good. Like it's bad. But that the reason, again, for the conversation today is that this can be better. This could be changed. Right. And so going back to making a change and you telling, you saying like, this is going to take time. So I wonder if, let's say you had an administration that was on board with doing this and they make a commitment to doing it. And they're like, look, and you're able to provide them, this is how much it's going to cost. This is the training that we need to go through. This is what's going to need to be developed. If we were going to put something like this together, how long does it take to put together? And how long does it take to start building this out? Like when I'm looking at like a time frame, what should people set themselves up for to be successful? Do we have an answer for that?
Yeah. So it could be as short as a year. 3 years is usually more likely.
3 years.
Because you have the generational change. You have to find out the people who are going to be willing to play along, and they have to learn that they are going to be held to a standard. You have to be willing to wash people out and maybe even take their instructor cert. You're not allowed to teach in the agency anymore because you don't meet these standards.
Yep.
But think about it like building a court case. I talk about when I create quality training material, I'm creating what I call a training chain of evidence. I'm showing the step-by-step process for everything that I'm delivering and why it's valid and sound. You need to do that with a training program also. The first place to start is by building the supporting documentation. just like an instructor should only be doing what the course material tells them to do, the training team should only be doing what's in your general orders or standard operating procedures. So you have to build all that stuff out first. You have to come up with the evaluation tools. You have to come up with all of that before you can start holding people accountable. Now you can start people on the path, but you have to find the people who are going to be willing to do it, because you're going to get plenty of dudes like, well, I've been building training for 20 years. I don't need to do this. I've been fine. It's like, no, you've been lucky. There's a difference between lucky and fine.
So I wonder, in terms of like who should be involved in this process, like who should the role players be? Should this be coming from strictly inside the agency and the current instructors? Let's say we've evaluated them as like, these are team players, these are the people we want on the team. Should it be coming from them? How much should be coming from the outside, like from somebody like you, to be able to do this? What does that look like?
It can be any of those. It just has to be based on a foundation. The course that I deliver is everything you would need for building out an entire program, but it is a way, not the way. I've been hearing that a lot more. I thought I was super smart by, I invented this back, 6 years. No, it's how it is. It's a way. This is everything you need, but everybody's policies, their cultures, everything is different. They have something to go off, but there are things that you have to have. You have to have the framework. You have to have a policy. You have to have a process. You can't just be throwing stuff at it again. You need to have step-by-steps. You need to have governance of review. How are we going to do the reviews? Who is going to do the reviews? Then you have to find the people who are willing to do that. And it can come from inside by people doing their own research. It can come from outside by hiring consultants. But you have to make sure that the consultants you're hiring actually know what they're talking about.
They're aligned, yeah.
Yeah, because as it is now, you hear people talk about using Bloom's taxonomy for performance objectives. Most people that I've heard talk about that are completely unaware that the Bloom's taxonomy they're used to is only one domain. There are multiple domains of Bloom's taxonomy. Most people are trying to fit everything into a cognitive domain, which was designed for higher education. They're not using the psychomotor, which is designed for training. So it's, you need to make sure that if people are going to do it themselves, that they're doing the reading, they're doing the research to make sure that they're not just adopting things like Dale's cone of knowledge, or they're not adopting, learning styles, that they're getting it from bona fide real material that's been tested, proven, and accepted by learning experts across the field.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, with that cone of knowledge thing was debunked, basically, right? I forget what the origins of that thing were, but basically it was the cone of knowledge.
Yeah, I posted on Instagram that it's not Dale's cone of knowledge or Dale's cone of learning, is total trash. Absolute total trash. It's Dale's cone of experience, and it was based entirely off of how film or multimedia tools used in higher education. That's all it was. But somebody adapted it to learning and knowledge, then somebody threw percentages at it, and they just keep adding on to it. And it pretty much, the rule is, in learning, if it's in a pyramid, it has to be 100% irrefutable.
Right.
If it's in a pyramid, it's 100%
it's facts. Right. It's facts.
Absolutely. So Dale's cone of knowledge is junk. Dale's cone of experience is useful for how to use multimedia tools. So learning styles is total trash. And that stirred the pot a little bit when I talked about learning styles. But I've been to a lot of instructor certification courses where they're like, learning styles are a thing. We need to use, some people learn by doing performing dance. Or it's like, no, it's not a thing, really.
So let's talk about what you're doing now and how you are helping people. And let's talk about how you could, obviously, you've done this at the agency level for a very long time at multiple levels. Excuse me, for multiple organizations. I wonder how, like, you're what you're doing now and how you're trying to help people. And then also maybe we can kind of delve into, there's third parties out there. There's a lot of third party instruction that happens in all kinds of things to support law enforcement, and how that may or may not be able to be adopted there. Again, that's a big undertaking. If you've got an instructor who's been, quote unquote, again, air quotes here, successful with their training business, and they're probably might be a little resistant to, looking at how they're actually doing it, what they're actually delivering, and what the actual outcomes are at the end. But I wonder if we can ultimately maybe get there. But let's go back to the first part, which is, what are you doing now, and how do you see this, how do you see it being delivered?
Well, I have courses that I deliver. My advanced course development, I have a basic course development. I have an instructor certification course where the first day and a half is just how to build training. People can develop their delivery skills over time. Mm-hmm. I also talk to a lot of people. I'll talk to anybody. I'll have conversations with people, but I also do direct consultation. I can be hired to consult training teams, academies, things like that. I do a lot of, in the corporate side, I've helped build training teams by establishing the governance and all that stuff. I'd like to see more law enforcement agencies do that. I focus more on the law enforcement because I'm more passionate about it. Mm-hmm. When I worked for the corporate world, I really struggled with being excited about building a training for Indians on how to earn an extra $1 by recommending some product when Houston was underwater and half our team was suffering. I'm like, can I go help them? And they're like, no, we need you to build this training. It's like, no. So I'm focused a lot on law enforcement, but I do it for the corporate world as well. They just have different priorities and they have different expected outcomes. I've also started a couple things. I've started a course review. I see a lot of people saying, I talk to my buddies and have them review my courses so they're good to go. It's like, that's good. That is a review. But you should probably have a third-party objective person review your courseware that's going to tell you the truth. And I've done that for a couple law enforcement trainings. I've done that for some corporate companies that sell to law enforcement. I've done it for a number of corporations. The corporations, I don't worry about the case law so much, but anything law enforcement related, I make sure it ticks all the case law for it as well. But then I'm going to be starting as soon as I've kind of taken it on the chin the last couple of years. 2023, I had 4 contracts dry up. We moved to Texas. I was starting to do international work for Caribbean nations and helping the law enforcement agencies down there. And that was all canceled. Wow. I'm okay with what the administration is doing on a lot of stuff. I'm just sad that all my work was canceled for 2025. Mm. So that's kind of stalled the training evaluation program that I'm planning on starting. Because there's, and what that is if people want me to come out and evaluate their training for their own edification, that's great. But I plan on paying myself to go to other people's training, and I'm going to post a review on it. And I have a rubric, and I believe I shared that with you, a rubric of what I'm going to evaluate it on. Once I have it validated, 4 companies have stepped up and said, we will volunteer to be validated by your program because they see the value of having a third-party independent person who is a learning professional evaluating their course materials and their courseware. So in conversations, I hear a lot of instructors say, well, the bad instruction is going to wash itself out. Mm. It does. But I think about all the cops who are paying out of their own time and their own money to be able to go to this training, not knowing if it's good or not. So this training evaluation program, I'm seeing it as like a consumer reports where I'm going to post, here's the 5-star rating on the instructor, the 5-star rating on the course. Here's my review of it. And then I'm going to have a 10-minute YouTube review of, how it went. And I'm expecting to get hate for it, but it's more important for me that cops are able to make better judgment on their training than it is to go by the testimonials. Nobody posts on their website, this course blew, the instructor was a total G. It's like, nobody's going to post that. So there needs to be an independent party who can evaluate this and say, this course was a 5 on the instructor, it was a 4.0 on the course materials and the course itself. And here's why, here's the rubric rating. But also once the training evaluation rubric is evaluated, that's going to be posted online too. So it's not going to be a secret. It's going to be, here's everything I'm evaluating. Mm-hmm. Here's what you need to meet certain post standards for acceptance. And here's what you need to hit learning standards. And so those are the main things I'm working on. Plus I build training for agencies. I build training for corporations, whether it's e-learning or instructor-led training. So I got a lot of irons in the fire, and except for economy and government policy, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, there's always navigating that. I think there's always a need for this, and then there's the acceptance of it or the reception of it, by the market, and that's always going to be a challenge. And again, when I look at this, it's somewhat unique, but it isn't. There are a lot of industries that go through this. You think like the auto industry for a long time did this.
Yeah.
I mean, we had magazines like Motor Trend or whatever that, for a long time, I think people really trusted that. And then it got weird, right?
Yeah.
Then it's like, well, who is actually paying for these reviews, and who's the publisher of that magazine? And, how did they get their vehicle, assessed and evaluated, and this one didn't, and all those kind of things. But the point of that being is there's always this, when it starts to move to when people see that, oh, people respect or value this, then there's corporate money that can move in behind it, and it can mess it all up. And in this particular instance, we're talking about something that isn't managed by corporate so much. There's a lot of money in the industry of law enforcement, firearms instruction, and whatnot, but I think there's some level of insulation there versus this other scenario. Again, go back to like Motor Trend as an example, but there's definitely a need. I've seen it happen in other industries where you've got like a group of, I don't know, they just decided they've knighted themselves as the police of this particular industry, and they say, what's good and what's bad, but there isn't anything. And they all have these interests, deeper rooted interests in, if they endorse this program or they've given this one a 5-star review somewhere, again, you just go back to the follow the money. It goes back to them somehow, and and then again, so maybe it started out with quote unquote good intentions, but it ends up being an alternate agenda, and then people ignore it, right? And then they think it's a joke, and then they move to other things, and it creates camps and it creates factions. This particular thing, for me, I believe there's some level of insulation there, and there's enough individuals out there that do care enough that outside of agencies and inside of agencies for that matter, that do care enough that would be, I would say maybe the word is courageous enough to embark on something like this, to get some unbiased, experienced, professional feedback on things. I don't know how that would work out or how that looks long term. And again, you got the challenges of, yes, this costs money. Yes, there's leadership changes quite frequently that mean you have to be able to navigate through who to have the conversation with, how to have the conversation, and so forth. So it's a large undertaking, but I don't know. I don't think there's anybody else out there doing that right now, Rick. I mean, is there anybody that you know of that's doing this and doing a good job?
I don't know of anybody who's doing it the way I'm planning on doing it. So I had to decide early on, because I've seen that. I've watched a lot of gun videos. I watch a lot of gunfluencers, posting about this firearm, and I always wonder. You seem to be excited, and everything you touch is like the best thing ever.
Why?
Yeah, exactly. And you watch these people that started out having candid and objective reviews, and I was like, well, the difference is they're getting paid for it. Mm-hmm. So I made it very clear from the get-go, and it will always be this way. If somebody pays me to go to their class, they're not getting a public review. It's purely, you're hiring me as a consultant to evaluate your course, to assess your course based on this rubric that I've invented or I've created. Mm. And that rubric isn't just something I've invented out of nowhere. It's based on my experiences having evaluated training for an international association and having evaluated training for, academy and for corporate world and for the military and stuff like that. The only people I'm going to be publishing publicly and having public comment on are courses that I pay for myself. No discount, no, we'll sponsor your hotel. We're going to buy you a steak dinner or anything like that. If they want to buy me steak, that's great. They're still going to get an honest review. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to pay for the course. I'm going to pay my own way to the course. And the way I see it is that there's a couple benefits. Number one, I get a lot more training.
Sure.
I'm excited about that. I haven't been able to go to a lot of training in the last couple of years. So I'm excited to go to the training. Number two, I get to share with the people who are going to be spending their time and their money on courses, whether or not the testimonials are true or not. I would like to become a trusted source, but there are going to be people who are like, well, what does Rick Jacobs know? He's just a flub who was a part-time deputy and was never in the military, and he's got a weird shaped head. I don't trust anything he says. That's fine.
Yep.
And then there's going to be the guys who are going to be like, I don't want you in my course. Okay, guess what? That's getting published too.
Yeah.
So, I've I have a very small circle of friends, so I'm not worried about people hating me. I've been hated most of my life, mainly by my father, but that's a completely different podcast. But I don't care what people think of me, really. I care that people value my work. I don't care what they think about me personally.
I appreciate that.
I've had drunks talk about wanting to rape my dog and murder my wife and stomp on my children. Okay, you're doing your job being a drunk. I'm doing my job being a cop. That's how I look at this training evaluation thing, is that you can hate me, dislike me, and disagree with everything I say. Okay, here's the rubric, argue that. Yeah. If I'm wrong, I am more than happy to be wrong. Just tell me how I'm wrong and show me how to be right, and we'll be good.
Yeah, I've never return the favor. Return the favor.
Yeah. I've never said that I'm infallible, but I'm pretty confident. Some would say I'm cocky, but they usually have low self-esteem, so they don't think that way.
I know. I totally appreciate that. I mean, I think that's the way to keep the integrity in the process, and that is you have to. I don't want to call it thick skin. You just have to know who you are and what you're trying to do, and stay genuine to that. And I think that's where people get lost. It's so easy out in the social media world to gain attention and get instant gratification or validation on you are doing the right thing, and easily ignore the truths that come out maybe in the quote unquote hate. I think, if you're going to sit there and you're going to accept that all the good stuff that comes into your feed or whatever else is truth, then you have to accept that some of the hate that comes across, there's going to be some truth in that and whatever that they're saying. Some, I'm not saying all, but some, and you have to be prepared for that, and you have to be okay with that. And I think you have a responsibility to go back and not dwell on it and hate yourself about it or whatever, or be pissed off. But you have a responsibility to kind of examine it and go, is there any truth in this? Is there room for me to improve or be better or communicate my message differently or whatever else? And I think when you start with the right platform and doing that, you mentioned that, like, I'm not going to go out and start hating on people, because if I start doing memes and hating on people and calling people out, then I should expect it's only going to distract from the message, right? And I get that. And by the way, I mean, you mentioned a couple guys there. I love what they do. I think it's great. And that's their thing. That's what they've signed up to do. But keeping it honest and keeping it genuine is extremely important. I think that's what people are looking for. I really think the majority of people, and that they struggle to find it. But more and more, they recognize when they see bullshit. Like, they can smell it. Their sniffer's gotten pretty good. So, again, balancing the hate against the value, I don't think is very hard to do if you start with a solid platform. And I think you've really done that well. So just in speaking about that, just like on the social media side, because you've been putting out more and more stuff lately. It seems to be getting quite a bit of traction, and not everything gets 1 million likes and 1 million views or whatever. I get that, but the things that you're putting out are simple. I've seen a couple different formats. One would just be, just kind of a little advice maybe, or a little perspective. Some of it would go back to the Dale's cone of knowledge thing, where you actually expand on it and go, like, this is bullshit. But you're not just leaving it there as this is bullshit. Here's why. Here's where it came from. Here's how it's been perverted, maybe is the right way to put it. Maybe not. That might be a little harsh, but perverted. And here's why you shouldn't put so much value in that thing. And here's how you could do it differently, or think about it differently, or do it better.
Right.
I appreciate that. So I'm seeing this stuff come out, and I think that's what this world needs. I wonder how this thing continues to evolve for you. What do you want to do with it all?
Well, just like with the training evaluation thing, the reason I have a rubric is so they can see what I ding them on, but also it tells them what they can do to improve. Mm-hmm. And if they want advice, I'm more than happy to give it to them. If they don't want my advice, at least they know the terminology to use in order to seek out improvement. It's all about improvement. It's not a catch. It's not a gotcha. It's not, look at this Rube, he's a piece of trash. All of the training evaluation is content agnostic. I might not agree with what you're saying. I'm only evaluating the quality of your course and the quality of the instructor, unless it's something dangerous and insane.
Yep.
Like, it's like the best way to clear a firearm is by blowing through the muzzle. I'm going to flag that,
right.
and that kind of thing. But that leads to everything I'm doing to open the door to what I didn't know existed for 13 years. I didn't know any of this stuff existed. The only way people are going to improve is if you tell them, hey, this is a thing. You may be doing this. Do you realize that here's the other thing? That's why I really went into detail about all the learning myths, but I provided one thing on the actual learning theories, because I want you to go out and read these theories and figure out how you can apply the theories and how your training should include all those theories in making it better. Because I'm going to give you some detail. This is what these theories mean. Now go out and research it for yourself. I don't learn by people telling me to do things. I learn by researching it, applying it, breaking it, screwing up, making a mistake, being told how to fix it, and then getting better. So I felt it's very important for me to not only call out the crap, but also to provide a goal or a direction to no longer be crap. The problem is the people who really need to hear it are usually the ones who think that they don't need to hear anything, the whole Dunning-Kruger thing. But there's enough instructors out there who know that they're missing something, who have that same intuition that I had for 13 years. I'm trying to open the door for them to see that I don't care if you hire me or not. I'd like to be hired. My wife really wants me to pay bills. She has this mortgage that she feels I should contribute to.
Yeah, that's a thing.
I'd love to get paid, but I'm more concerned about the guy on the street who's suffering because they have an instructor that just doesn't know. He's not a bad instructor. He's doing excellent work with the limited knowledge that he has. He just doesn't know. And if you don't know where to look, you can't start looking for it. Just putting out there as much as I can, instructional design. All my hashtags have instructional design. Because if they go out and they search it, that's opening a world for them that if I benefit from it, great. But the guy who benefits is the guy on the road. The whole reason I was one of my first corporate jobs after I was medically retired was for a web technology company. I have because I was doing graphic design in the 1990s. I was there when web design first started. I started programming, hand jamming, HTML2. Stupid excited when you could put things in tables. That was freaking rocket science. So getting into web technology was very easy for me. But I was after about 3 months, I was offered a job as an instructor or as an instructional designer. And I really thought about it because I love instructing, but I decided I wanted to be an instructional designer because by being an instructional designer, I can influence far more people than I could as an instructor itself. I love to teach, but I'd rather train the trainer to make that impact. So that's what this website is. This is what my work is. That's what Instagram is about, is to train the trainer, the guy who's hungry, the guy who wants to learn, the guy who's willing to say, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Where do I start? I can say, start with this, and they can move forward with it.
That resonates hugely with me because that's more or less the career path I took in terms of, starting as an instructor and then moving on to working with instructors and companies to have better instruction, or better companies just run better businesses. And so it's kind of a passion project. It can pay the bills. You're not going to make $1 bazillion doing it. And usually what I find is the best instructors are that at heart. And the best leaders are that at heart. And somewhere along the way, yes, they can make some money on it. I don't fault them for that. More power to you. That's if you can make and earn a living, extending value so that other people can extract that from you to make other people better, then you're contributing something valuable to society and to particular, populations, institutions, organizations, whatever else. And I'll never shit on somebody for that. Like, I think that's, in saying that, I think there's so much opportunity here. And I just think about I've had some really great instruction and I've had some really poor instruction. And none of them were bad people. Well, there may have been a couple in there. There were a couple people in there that were questionable, if I'm being honest. But at the same time, they're all coming from this place where like, I just want to help this person get better. And some of it is personal satisfaction and seeing that person get better. But more of it is this knowing that what I've done is I've paid it forward somehow, and all this knowledge that I have. And one of the some of the things you bring to the table that I think a lot of these good instructors wish they had, and they just don't know what they don't know, is how to deliver it. And you mentioned like all the different experiences you've had through everything: graphic design, web design, instructional design. Those are skills, and those are things that take a long time to put together and build and refine and get good at. And some instructors will figure out a way to kind of do that along the way and do it better than somebody else. And maybe it's not so great, but it's better than the other guy, right? Yeah. And because it's better than the other guy, it's valuable to them, and it's valuable to their audience and whoever's consuming that stuff. And you're able to bring this wealth of knowledge and this huge background and experience in all these different areas to help people get better at that too. So they may not just be getting like course evaluation. They're getting information on how to deliver the information better, which then can open up so many things to, all right, well, now I'm the Lone Ranger out here. I'm an instructor. I have my own company. How can I reach more people to do the thing that I love, that's important for me, that also puts food on the table and helps me pay my mortgage, and do it through things like social media, web design, online, maybe learning management systems, things that exist out there that people pay they end up spending so much money. They get themselves so in the weeds trying to learn it all, and they recognize like it's just too much. It's like information overload, because they're getting what somebody else has sold them, going back to the whole sales process. Like, oh, this is what you need. You need this platform. This platform's the right platform, but it won't fulfill. It doesn't have the capability to fulfill the things within the instructional process that you're saying are so important.
Right.
It doesn't fit, and that ends up being a waste of finance, time, and energy.
And one of the things that you hit on, learning management systems. For one of my clients, they want to put out training. It's a law enforcement agency. Want to put out training on how to identify intoxicated people. Trying to find a learning management system, $10,000-$15,000 to serve 5,000 people who would use one course once. It was insane. So because of all my background, I went out and I started a web hosting business specifically for law enforcement agencies to host their own training for ridiculously low money. And they have two options. I can either build them a Moodle instance, or I can put them onto a company called MyQuest, which is the only learning management system, and it's actually a learning content management, learning content delivery system. I went out and I looked for these things because I've talked to so many agencies, but I give a lot of this stuff away for free. I all my documents, all my charts, all my, for the scenario-based training series that I did on Instagram, the last one has link to my website, which has the templates I use. They can download an example, and they can download the Word documents that they can use those things themselves. It's free. I'm not going to gatekeep anything. If you want to learn how to use it all at once, take a course. Otherwise, you can piece it together over my years of posting if you want to. Yeah. But I don't want to stand in the way of people developing, learning, improving the quality of their instruction, improving the quality of the lives of the people that they're training. So my wife gets mad at me. She's like, you give away too much. You need to get paid. I'm like, I know. But she also gets it that I care about the guys on the street. I care about the agencies. I care about the admin. It's a knowledge game. It's just 100% a knowledge game.
Yeah, I can totally appreciate that too. Coming from my end of my business and kind of what we do, is it's really important that you build trust with people. You give them some things that they can utilize, and some people can figure it out. But there's a lot of people that don't have the time, the energy, the resource, the knowledge to do that. And so that's available to, what you're saying is that's available to them if they want it. And yeah, that should cost money, man. Like there's no shame in that. They should be paying you for that time. And because it shortcuts the process for them, and it gives them the things that they don't. And when I say shortcutting, I don't mean devaluing it. I just mean, instead of taking you 3 years to make 8 mistakes, where you're learning through those mistakes, but now you've made a $15,000 investment in a learning management system that you recognized after you put that into it, plus all the hours, the time, whatever. There's videos and the content, and you've uploaded it all, and you recognize this isn't working. I can't tell you how many times I've made those mistakes, particularly on the technology end of things.
Right.
To have somebody that goes, that's the wrong thing. You want this. Here's all the reasons why. This is an example of how that would look. Like, it's there. You could do it on your own if you want, but here we have, I have a platform for you to be able to do that on. I think that's what people are looking for. I think the majority of people that really want to make this a thing over the long term, they will invest in that. And I know I have. And the only regrets I have about doing that when I have is that I didn't do it sooner. It's like, why? I learned so many lessons from you. I wish I didn't have to learn all the other ones first. I understand that's part of the process, but I wish I hadn't had to make the $10,000 mistake, right? Like I could have invested it here and I would have been a lot further ahead.
Exactly. And that's a lot of like when they're buying a course, I don't charge a lot for my courses. I try to make them inexpensive enough that the guys that have to pay out of pocket aren't crushing their bank.
It's like accessible.
Yeah. $1,500 for a course for one person, one seat. I know there's corporate companies that charge $3,000 for a 3-day course on how to be a better instructor. I don't have money for that. So I price things so that anybody can afford them. And it's not a big question of like, do we go without paying the electricity or do you go to this training? But they're paying for my 30 years of stumbling, stomping, banging my head, rage, anger, trash training, all that stuff. But there are people out there who are instructors because they want to improve performance. They want to improve people because they care about people, and they charge what they have to. But then there are people out there who are charging what they can. And that just kind of feels icky, especially in an industry where cops don't make a lot of money. It's like people are like, well, New York City cops make $150,000. It's like, have you ever lived in New York?
Yeah,
$150,000 is $30,000 in Appalachia.
These guys don't even live in our city because they can't afford to live in the city that they work in.
Exactly. So I've had friends who are like, you should charge more because your competitors are charging more. I don't want to price people out of it. I don't want somebody to go without learning because they don't have the money for it.
Right.
But it's time, it's energy, but I can price things in such a way to make it more reachable, Right.
Yeah, no, I think if somebody really wants it, right, and they don't have to make the choice between, again, paying the electric bill, and getting the training that they need and want. Like there's, again, in terms of from the business side of things, I think a lot that resonates with a lot of people. And the can versus should is that's not a question that I want to be asking of whoever my provider is. Like, I think the way you're delivering information sets people up to understand the value that they are or would get from working with you for whatever the price point is. Because there's some that will and some that won't buy. Right. So that's just how things work. I think so. Just on that, as we're kind of wrapping up here, where do people find out about you? Where should they go to get more information? I know you've had a lot of projects going on. The social media side has been one of them. You've been doing a really great job, in my opinion, on the Instagram side of things. I know you mentioned the YouTube, posting and doing reviews on YouTube and building maybe out a channel there. I love that I'm getting to talk to you kind of not at the grassroots of this, because you've already done. This is just like the implementation and getting it going. Part of it. I love like knowing about the club before everybody else knows about the club. So let's talk about how they could potentially learn more about that club and maybe get in touch with you, follow you, get some of your information and so forth.
Well, I've mentioned before that I have a face for radio and a voice for print. So I don't expect a lot of long form. I'm not going to be starting a podcast ever. I don't have the personality or the sense of humor for it. But the YouTube channel is primarily going to be a place where I post of instructional materials for my classes. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking about doing some like 10-minute 10-minute tricks on different pieces and stuff. Mm-hmm. But primarily the YouTube channel is going to be used for the training evaluations. and where I can talk about it. Mostly, as much as I worked for international advertising agencies, I suck at marketing myself. And I don't like buying into the algorithms. I used to have a big following on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn page. I post on that occasionally, but LinkedIn doesn't like law enforcement. So they choke the crap out of anything that has a hashtag that's law enforcement related. I've tested it, and that's my experience. But I do post a lot on LinkedIn under my name, Rick Jacobs. It's all those links are on my website, letnec.com, and then Instagram. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on TikTok. A couple of people have told me I should go on TikTok, and I just can't do it. I feel like I'm gonna have to learn how to dance, and I'm gonna look like a chump, and I just don't want to get on that road.
There's plenty of other platforms to spend your time on, man.
So I'd rather post on Instagram and have quality. I'd rather do a daily post of value or even a weekly post. I post twice a week on LinkedIn. But because I've moved more towards law enforcement, less corporate, I don't have near the traction I used to. But I'm not here to be popular. I'm here to get knowledge out. And I post whether people look at it or not. If I get 3 likes, I don't care. If I get 1,800, that's great. I feel just as excited about it. Algorithms are not designed, and social media is not designed for disseminating information. It's designed to feed your self-conscious.
It's entertainment. Yep, it's entertainment. This stuff is rather deep, a little bit heavy, and it's intellectual. And that's why I love it. That's why I love seeing your stuff. That's why you'll see me repost it in my story and comment where I feel like I can provide some type of engagement. If it can be a value of some kind. I love it. I know a lot of people do. I found out about you through other folks in the industry.
Oh, really?
And they're sharing your stuff. And, and when I share it, they often comment like on my story. And so it's created conversations with people. I've met people through reposting your stuff, through the interwebs the power there, and particularly again on the Instagram platform, it's not, I have like a deep internal resistance to social media as it is, but I understand the power of it. And if it's used properly, it does provide a lot of value. So going back, like I've built some relationships based on some discussions, largely centered on your content. So it is reaching people, man. It is reaching people.
You never really know, because I'll have people on LinkedIn. I post things. I hear back from a year ago. It's like, hey, I used that document you posted. It's completely changed our training team. Or somebody will reach out and say, hey, I saw that post you posted 3 years ago, and it did this. I'm like, wow, okay, cool. So I'm socially awkward and unaware usually. It made dating suck because I couldn't tell that chicks were interested. But I'm pretty much the same on Instagram. I have no idea if people like my stuff or if it's making an impact. I just put it out there because I just feel the need that somebody somewhere, if it helps one person, if it saves one life, whether it's civilian or law enforcement, then my time and energy is worth it.
Yeah, that is again, don't stop doing that, man. That's my, for whatever it's worth. That's my encouragement. Keep doing what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I think a lot of other people do. I know a few that do. I'm really anxious and encouraged to see this thing grow and pick up some steam. I think it will. I know you know how to work hard, and I know this is a long process.
Yeah.
But I can't wait to see, again, a guy that's process driven work through this and see what the outcomes are. My gut's telling me there are some names in this business, and there are some people or in this industry that are going to want to take advantage of this, and they're going to do it. And it may take them along. What I found is think people are a little bit I don't know if the word's gun shy. That's probably not the right analogy. They're a little cautious, about tiptoeing around things that could be enlightening. I'll just use that word in air quotes, and maybe challenge their belief system and their experience levels in certain things. And for those people that are out there listening, I would just highly encourage you, to pay a little bit closer attention. You may be a little unsure, and I get that. But based on my experience through a similar process, it was probably that course that I took and that time that I spent as a instructor coming through a very well designed, monitored, evaluated, and a lot of accountability in that process, it's probably and could likely be one of the most, probably top 3 most valuable experiences I've ever had as a young professional. Early in my career, it's 25 years ago now, a little less than 25 years ago, and how I've taken those skills into everything, including the podcast. So if there's anything that you like about the podcast and how information comes across and how we ask questions and how we get information from folks and the people that we connect with, a lot of it's largely rooted in the things that you've been talking about, Rick. So I highly encourage people to check you out and to pay attention. So go follow. What's the Instagram handle?
It's LET_N_EC. Neck.
Yeah, we'll put it all the stuff will be in the show notes, both on the audio and the visual side, the YouTube and the Spotify and the Apple Podcast side. We'll also put it in the post that we do. And I wish you the best of luck, man. I really appreciate the time you spent with me, not just today, but we've had quite a bit of back and forth. We had a really good conversation on the phone that's just left me, kind of thinking, and you offered up your materials. I've seen those materials. They are extraordinarily extensive, and I mean that in the best kind of way. There's a lot of nuts and bolts in there, and then there's also things that are just like, again, I mentioned ninja in your brain a little bit. It's like, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or I didn't think about that before, but now that I'm seeing it in writing, right, and I'm reading through, I'm going, oh shit, that makes perfect sense. That's the connection point. So, and again, like you said, you put a lot of free material out there. So go check that material out.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for your time. Thanks for your energy and your attention and your passion. I appreciate you. I feel like at some point there'll be a time where we probably need to revisit this conversation. So I'd ask, maybe to make a commitment to me at some point as you move down the line here and things are starting to expand, as you've done a few reviews and we're getting some feedback and things are evolving here, that maybe we sit back down and do this again and catch up. You cool with that?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, I told Pat from Apex Training that I was going to shout out that he was the first one to volunteer for the training evaluation. He was the first one to ask for a course review. And so the people are out there. There are 3 other companies that have volunteered, EPC in California, Millennia Defense in California, and Valor in Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh, nice. So I know all those guys except for one. But all great guys. I mean, I love Pat. Pat spent time with me here on the show. A great episode with him. And again, a guy that's had a lot of experiences and is super passionate about getting good information out. Super honest. Takes him on the chin on occasion. Just keeps on coming back with good stuff. And it only takes one, man. It usually just takes one. But you got some. That's a pretty solid lineup. Again, I don't know one of those, but I know the other ones. And they interestingly are putting out information the same way you're putting it out.
Yeah.
So it makes sense. It's very congruent. So best of luck there.
Industry's changing and we're here for it.
Yeah, I love it. All right, brother. I'll take good care and best of luck moving forward, and hope to talk to you soon.
Appreciate it. Absolutely. And yes, I commit to talking to you again soon.
Excellent. I'm going to hold you to it.
All right, man.